Story 1. No right turn on red. It was well past midnight as I drove home from my new job. The pay wasn't so good, and it was far from home, but I really had no choice considering I was behind on rent, exhausted from working long first day. I just wanted to get home and sleep. I thought I knew the way back, but I had arrived during daylight hours when it was easier to manage my new surroundings. Street lights were scarce, which I hadn't noticed in the afternoon. And to make matters worse, it was snowing somewhere along the way. I must have taken a wrong turn, and soon I was completely lost. After driving aimlessly through unfamiliar neighborhoods, I finally came to a traffic light. I was relieved, as it meant the highway was nearby. I was almost positive it was to the right, but the light was red. A sign on the corner stated, "Nitrogen monoxide, right turn on red." Who was I to argue with all capital letters? Yet it was so late that none of the houses I passed had lights on, and there were no cars around. Surely it was okay to make a right turn. "Screw it," I said, and stepped on the gas. Halfway through the turn, something darted out into the intersection. A loud, dull thud echoed through the car, and I slammed on the brakes. At first, I didn't react. I just shut off the engine and sat there, hoping it was an animal. Once the initial shock wore off, my hope turned to assumption. I exited the car with my fingers crossed and my breath held. As I rounded the front of the vehicle, I saw the legs of a child. My heart sank into my stomach, and I fell to my knees. Sick and ashamed, I stood up, but not straight, and walked closer to the child. It was a girl, possibly around 8 years old. She had a little blue backpack, and must have been holding a sleeping bag that was now lying unraveled a few feet away. She lay face down, her blonde hair covered in dark red blood. One by one, delicate snowflakes touched down upon her lifeless body. In the headlights, she resembled some kind of fallen angel. I felt I was being taught a lesson, a harsh one at that. I returned to the car and dialed 911. As I waited for help to arrive, I went over the incident in my head. Though it was a minor violation, I knew I couldn't tell them I made an illegal right turn, especially when it resulted in such a tragedy. As far as anyone was concerned, the light was green. The police arrived with an ambulance, and I went to greet them. When I tried to show them the girl, she had disappeared. There wasn't even blood on the ground or an imprint in the snow. "You say you hit someone and they were right here?" "Yes, I saw them. It was a little girl. I swear to God I had no idea where she had gone or why there was no evidence that anyone was hit by a car. I probably seemed crazy. Well, they must have run off." "You checked to make sure she wasn't breathing?" No. I saw the blood, and she wasn't moving." "I was in shock," I replied, feeling like a complete idiot. Of course I should have checked, but I was too busy figuring how to cover my own ass. To say it was embarrassing wouldn't do it justice. "You were going pretty slow. Chances are she was just stunned. We'll search the area. She couldn't have gotten far. Just sit tight, and we'll find her." I sat in silence while they scoured the area for the little girl. Somehow I knew they wouldn't find her, as there were no footprints. My eyelids were getting heavy, and I kept seeing flashes of the girl's body whenever I would drift off for a moment. With each vision, her face gradually turned towards me. her eyes full of sorrow and anger. Just as I was falling asleep, there was a knock on my car window. They hadn't found any sign of the girl, but they let me know if anything was reported. It was somewhat of a relief, and yet equally unsatisfying. The whole way home I drove way under the speed limit, stopping at every intersection. Even when the light was green, I didn't get much sleep that night. The next day I wasn't thrilled about going to work, but as a new employee, I really had no choice. As ridiculous as it sounds, I got lost again. On the way home, I had meant to print out some reverse directions, but was too preoccupied with the events of the previous evening. Once again, I drove through parts unknown and eventually came to a red light. Is this the same intersection? I asked myself. At the time, I wasn't sure, but it did age. Ave, the same sign. Nitrogen monoxide, right turn on red. I was correct about the highway being to the right, so I knew I was going to have to make the turn. This time I would wait until the light changed. I'm not sure how much time passed, but it must have been at least 20 minutes. The clock on my phone had stopped at 12:47, so I wasn't sure. For a while I just stared at the words nitrogen monoxide, right turn on red, contemplating why they were mocking me. The light wasn't changing, and my patience was fading. Are you kidding me? I protested. I didn't want to do it, but there wasn't much of a choice. This time I turned very slowly and looked around to make sure no one was there. I thought it was all clear when, just as the night before, something darted out in front of the car. Shit, I shouted, slamming on the brakes. This can't be happening. I jumped out of the car and rushed to inspect the body. My jaw dropped when I realized it was that same girl. She had the same little blue backpack. The same sleeping bag was lying unraveled just a few feet away, and her blonde hair was stained with dark red blood. I didn't know what to think. My mind went completely blank while I stared at the horrific scene. Whether it was real or not, it was far worse. The second time I retreated to my car again, but this time I hesitated to call the police. Then I remembered what the officer had said about Mackin. Gee, sure she was dead. I went back to check, but she was gone. My third day of work was painful. I couldn't concentrate under the circumstances, and no one was going to understand or be sympathetic. Different scenarios kept playing out in my head. I imagined a little girl going to a slumber party. She's having fun with her friends until they play a cruel prank on her. She calls her mother in tears, but her mother says she's too tired to pick her up and that she must walk home. On the way I hit her with my car. That was just one of the scenarios, but it seemed the most plausible. I started to think she could be a ghost who had already been struck by someone else's car. Perhaps it was a hit and run, and now she needed someone to find out who killed her. But why me? When my shift ended, I was reluctant to leave. After driving to work a few times, I had finally memorized the way home, but I was still afraid of that intersection. That sign. I drove cautiously with eagle eyes and eventually merged onto the highway, invoking a collective sigh of relief from every cell in my body. I smiled and turned up the radio as I accelerated past the speed limit. It seemed to be taking quite a while to reach my exit, but I was too tired to find it suspicious. My eyelids were getting heavy, and for a moment I almost fell asleep. As I took an extended blink, I was suddenly somewhere else. The highway was gone, and in front of me was an intersection with a red light. A sign on the corner persisted. Nitrogen monoxide, right turn on red. What the? I looked around in disbelief. It was that same intersection. How I got there was completely beyond my understanding. Was some otherworldly force trying to tell me something? Was it my destiny to help this little girl? All I wanted to do was go home. This time I would wait until the light turned green. If I had to wait all night. I think I sat there for a few hours, but my phone had stopped at 12:47 again. Perhaps the little girl died at that time. The light was still red, and I knew it was never going to change. Something was reaching out to me for help, but I didn't care. All I wanted to do was go home. I shouted at the traffic light, "Just change already, asshole," as if it would be intimidated. As I became more irate and delusional, the thought of killing the little girl a third time became almost desirable. But then I remembered how I felt each time. I knew she couldn't be real, but the experience was just as real as anything. I shook the notion and put my hands firmly on the wheel. I couldn't sit there forever, so there was only one thing to do. "Screw it," I said, and I made a left. Story 2. It bleeds. It's that time of year again. Any day now the earth around me will be covered in snow. Children who are not fazed by the cold will spend hours outside playing in it, building snowmen, having snowball fights, and going sledding, and of course they will be looking forward to snow days where they can spend even more time outside rather than being trapped indoors in classrooms. I envy them. As I have grown older, I have come to dislike the cold. Maybe that's what happens to everyone as they grow up. We begin to associate the cold with unpleasant things instead of fun things like snowmen and making snow angels. No, we associate the cold to mean illness and even pain. We become bitter, more annoyed by it. We complain about the shoveling, the runny noses, the aching joints. I have also become bitter about winter, but it's not for the same reasons. It's because I made a mistake, a very terrible mistake. Last year we had a pretty bad snowstorm. Schools were closed as well as local businesses. The radio and TV weather stations cautioned people to drive carefully if they have to be on the road, but otherwise to just stay home. In some areas they had whiteout conditions. I remember when I was a little girl, I loved watching the snow fall. Sometimes it came down so fast it was like a blanket of white. It was beautiful to me. But now it's stained in blood. I was on the road during the snowstorm. I was heading home after a 10-hour shift. I remember wanting nothing more than to go home and get in bed. 10 hours of running machinery on a factory line will make anyone a bit irritated, and therefore I was in a rush to get home. Maybe I was cocky, thinking I could drive faster on the back roads. Maybe I simply didn't care. But I should have. I honestly didn't see her, the old lady. I sometimes wonder why she went out during a snowstorm to check her mail. Why didn't she stay inside? What could she have possibly been thinking? But it doesn't matter. Those questions won't bring her back. Maybe not the questions, but I am sure she will be back. As a rule of mine, I kept the cell phone on the passenger seat, just in case of an emergency. I thought I had the ringer turned off. It never rang before while I drove, but that day it did. I tried to ignore it. I tried to picture my warm bed instead that was waiting for me, but it wouldn't stop ringing, and the ringtone, it's one I don't remember having set. Finally, I couldn't take it. I grabbed the phone, and as I flipped it open, I looked back to the road. My eyes were off the road for less than a minute, enough time for this old lady in a blue worn jacket to appear. I still remember how she seemed to be turning toward me in slow motion. The headlights light up her face, especially her widening gray blue eyes. I still see those eyes sometimes when I sleep. It was so quick. I saw her turn towards me, then there was a thud, and a loud thud, but more like the sound a large stuffed toy makes when a child drops it from the top of the stairs. Just like a stuffed toy, she hit the bumper, bounced up, and hit my windshield, then some. Bounce up again, and hit the hood of my car. She fell off to the side. At this point, my car swerved, and I nearly ran it into the ditch. But as soon as I had managed to stop, I turned off the car. But I didn't go out right away after the old woman. Instead, I remained frozen behind the steering wheel. I felt like I couldn't get enough air. My heart was racing to the point I was sure would make it burst. I rested my forehead against the cool steering wheel, trying to calm myself down. Why was I not thinking about that lady I just hit? I don't know. I just know I wasn't. But I should have. A soft thud made me open my eyes. I wish I hadn't. God, I wish I hadn't. A hand was on the hood of my car, the fingers more like claws as the nails scratched at the paint. I watched as a head of long gray hair came into view. The wind blew the hair forward, covering her face. Slowly she pulled herself up. Her blue knitted jacket stood out in all the white swirling around her, but not nearly as much as the bloody stump from her left shoulder where her arm once was. The wind picked up, and I thought I was screaming. But then I realized it was her screaming. The wind seemed to be picking it up and carrying it to my ears. At the time her screams made no sense to me. For you see, she wasn't screaming in pain, nor was she screaming for help. No, what she was screaming was this: "My skin bleeds. It bleeds." She raised her remaining hand, holding it out as if to show me her hand. And I did see it. I shouldn't have been able to boo. I did. Her skin was pale and covered in red splotches. Where these red splotches were, there was broken skin that was bleeding. Then the wind changed direction, and her hair flew out of her face. Her face had similar splotches, the broken skin, and tiny trails of blood made it appear as if her face was cracking. I opened the car door and got out again, an action that took no longer than a minute. But that's all it took. She vanished. I don't know how. I rushed to the front of my car, and despite the blinding snow, I searched for her. But she wasn't there, I swear. I looked all around the car. Nothing. Finally, I couldn't bear to be out in that cold any longer, so I got back into my car and started it up. Maybe I had fallen asleep behind the wheel and dreamed up the old woman. After all, old ladies don't just up and disappear, not during a snowstorm. This is what I convinced myself. So I drove home. But I didn't go to sleep as I had planned. No. Instead, as the wind again picked up, I swore I heard her screams. "My skin bleeds, it bleeds." Over and over again, I heard these until the storm finally ended in the morning. I was so exhausted. Why then, my eyes seemed to close and I was out. But I woke up only a few minutes later. the first thing I became aware of is how cold I was. I was freezing. Maybe I left a window open. Maybe it got broke. When I sat up, I realized that my bed was covered in snow. Not only that, but the rest of my bedroom was too. I looked to the window and saw that not only was it not broken, but it was firmly shut. So, where did the snow come from? I got out of bed and took a single step. That's when I saw it. Handprints in the snow. They were everywhere, as if someone had been crawling around my room. I was shaking with fear as I forced myself to walk around my bed and check to see if the source of the handprints were hidden there. To my relief, I found nothing. Then I opened my bedroom door. This time I did scream. Scratched into my bedroom door was this: "Your skin bleeds. It bleeds." The scratches dripped in blood. I called the authorities. I told them about the old woman I hit and what I woke to. They told me that they would look into it and send an officer by. Strangely, none ever stopped by. Later, they called me back and told me that they searched the area I had described but found no sign of an old woman in a blue jacket. What they did find was signs of me nearly driving off the road. Black ice, they said. There's no old woman. But what of the bloody words scratched into my bedroom door? As I was on the phone, I looked at my door. There were no words. I reached my hand out to touch it to see if I was really seeing it. The door was iced cold. When I pulled my hand back, a hand impression was left behind, and slowly it began to bleed. The police insisted there was no old lady out in the snow. But they are wrong. I know that. At first I believed them. I allowed myself to believe that I just fell asleep behind the wheel for a moment, that there had been no prints in the snow, no bloody words scratched into my door. Now I know there was an old woman, and I killed her. She is getting her revenge, though it's a slow revenge, slow and painful. Every time the weather gets cold and the snow starts to fall, my skin becomes dry. Very doctor. Why? Lotions, oils, nothing helps. It burns, cracks, and finally bleeds just like the old lady scratched into my door. My skin bleeds, it bleeds and bleeds and bleeds. Story 3. After hours. It was around mid-hay when the call came. My manager at Target was asking whether I could work that night. The store had been understaffed recently since many of my co-workers had left town. I didn't think much of it. At the time, I didn't really have time to make friends. In the retail business anyway. I do remember one guy though. What was his name again? I think it was Andrew. Yeah, that's it. I remember that he used to wear a striped red tie to work every day, even when it wasn't a part of the dress code. Murky clouds had already filtered out the sun as I left home for work. I wasn't and halfway to work before the first droplets of rain had begun to fall. I parked my car one street down from the shopping center and ran to the side entrance to escape the rain. Entering the store, I was head in the artificial white light of the hundreds of fluorescent bulbs above. The light was welcome, but the air around it had a stale, oppressive feeling to it. I know that sounds strange, but and you've worked in a department store for long enough, the environment feels extremely unnatural. It's as if you're being completely isolated from the outside. The warm, unfiltered air doesn't quite fill up your lungs, and the plain white interior forces an abnormal feeling of cleanliness about the room. The first thing I noticed as I walked around the store was that it was completely devoid of sound. There was no music playing in the background, no sounds of people walking around and talking. The room was still, almost as if frozen in time. The store should have still been open for another hour, and yet there was no one here. I decided to go to the employee reception and find my manager. I opened the fire exit door and stiffened as it loudly snapped shut behind me. The metallic clicking sound echoed in the silence. I climbed the stairs to the reception landing and looked around. No one here either. At this point, I wasn't necessarily scared, more uncomfortable and confused. Suddenly a hand firmly grasped my shoulder, and I leapt forward in surprise. Backing off, I saw my manager looking at me with a questioning face, hand still suspended midair. I breathed a deep sigh of relief as she began to explain my duties for the night. As I walked back out onto the main floor, I noticed that the store was alive again. Popular hit songs played in the background as people walked around, talking amongst themselves. I was genuinely shocked. Was I just imagining things before? I shrugged it off. Why should I care? Things are normal and, so I was carrying out my assignments, tidying shelves, helping customers, when the announcement for the closing of the store beamed out on the public announcement system. As usual, the customers made their way to the front of the store and left one by one, until there was only the workers remaining. Following suit, my fellow employees also left the store back to their homes. Unfortunately, my job was not yet done as I was still on the clock until dawn. In spite of this, I moved to the bedding section of the homewares department with a hunch back, letting out a long and silent yawn. What I saw when I arrived astonished me. A whole aisle of quilts and blankets had been trashed. The packages were pulled from the shelves, items removed from the packaging and strewn haphazardly along the aisle. I groaned inwardly. Some pain-in-the-ass customers had decided to examine all the quilts firsthand and left their mess for me to clean up. I began to bend to pick up a few quilts when the light at the end of the aisle began to flicker rapidly. It was hypnotizing. It made the room in front of me appear as an old movie reel. Without warning, a black deformed figure quickly lurched across the end of the aisle. Beneath the flickering light from about 15 meters, I'm not sure if what I saw was a fabrication of the dancing light or something supernatural. I've never believed in that kind of thing. It had to have been a joke, probably choreographed by the manager. I blinked a few times and rubbed the sleepiness from my eyes, dragging my hands down my face and pulling on my cheeks. I reopened my eyes. As my vision focused, I saw that the clutter before me had ceased to exist. All of the stock was neatly packed on the shelves. Blankets were folded precisely and stacked symmetrically. At the far end of the aisle, the light was no longer flickering, its bright light reflecting on the now clean white tile floor. Everything was back to the way it should have been, and yet it seemed all wrong. Once again, it seemed that something impossible had happened right before my eyes with no logical explanation. I was definitely worried. Now I reached to my pocket for my company phone to call for the manager. I dialed the 3 digits and held the phone to my ear. I was expecting it to be out of service or battery, as is the cliché in these kinds of situations, but to my relief, the ringing sound played, but I could hear the ringing sounds one through the phone and one from halfway up the store. From the direction of the toys department, I recognized the second ringing as the specialized ringtone for the manager. I always hated the toy department. The shelves were far above my height, reaching at least 2 shelves above my head. It was hard to find things in this area because it was like an overgrown hedge maze covered in children's toys. I began to move quickly toward the sound of the ringing, hoping to catch my manager busy at work. I walked along the far end of the rows of aisles, head tilted, looking along each one till I found the source of the ringing. I stopped toward the center aisle when I saw it, a large pool of red, further down the passageway of shelves. Off to the side was a phone, slowly moving around as it vibrated. It was coated with the red substance. Subconsciously, I started to take baby steps towards the large splatter of red, torso leaning away, ready to run, the sight of trouble. As I got closer, I noticed that the red liquid continued along down the aisle and around the corner, as if something was dragged through the initial pool. At this point, I knew it couldn't have been a joke anymore, and my natural instinct to stay out of dangerous situations kicked in. I turned back to leave. What now towering shelf wall was blocking the exit that I had just came in through. I hadn't noticed until now, but the shelves that lined the aisle now reached the ceiling, making it impossible to climb over. This is impossible. What's going on? I looked back to the gory scene in the aisle to find that it was no longer there. It was as if there was never any spill in the first place, and the manager's phone was nowhere to be seen. I was frozen to the spot. I didn't know what to do. I willed my body to move. I told myself that at the first sight of any trouble, I was going to run straight for the fire exit and leave. I started to briskly walk out of the toy department and down the main walkway towards the front of the store. That was when the lights started to flicker. Every light in the entire store began to flicker on and off. Not like the last time where it flickered quickly. This time flickered slowly and randomly. But what I saw in between the lights being on and off scared me more than I had been in my entire life. The distorted black figures were surrounding me. There had to have been at least 20, shuffling and hobbling in random directions around me. I was able to see what they looked like up close. Long dangling jaws with misshapen and crooked teeth, their arms hinge out in front of them, knuckles dragging along the ground as they limped around on stick-like legs. I could only see them when the lights were off. It was strange. 1 second they would be engulfing me, and the next would seem as if they were not even there at all. That was when the lights began to shut off, one by one, row by row. Starting from the front of the store, the lights began to go out as if someone had knocked over a long line of dominoes. I started running towards the back of the store, where the light shone brightly, illuminating the ever-increasing darkness. I was in an adrenaline-fueled panic as I ran to the back corner of the store with my back against the wall. I watched as the last row of lights went out until the last light directly above me was remaining. It was as if I was on stage, a single spotlight shining down upon me. I looked out at the audience, a disgusting and hideous monstrosities, as they surrounded me. I took a slow, deep breath of recognition as I saw the closest one wearing an old and torn, yet visible, striped red tie. The light above me clicked off. Story 4. I've never seen a child eat their pet before. When I joined the case at 47 County Street, I didn't know what to expect. As a social worker, I see all kinds of screwed up things from child abuse to children abusing their parents. Yet, when I got the reports from County Street, I wasn't expecting much. The initial letters we received were from a neighbor describing loud noises, shouting in the late hours of the night, and a teenager storming off from the household on a bike last winter just after the sound of glass shattering from inside the house. This apparently had been going on for a few years. Still, something about the way the cop came in on Tuesday, white as a sheet, asking about the case, probably should have at least somewhat set off some alarms. I was ignorant. There I stood in the living room of the B. Edford family home on County Street, beside myself as the story unfolded. Dan, the father of the 3 children, spoke first with tears in his eyes. I'm so glad somebody called on us. My wife and I would have never had the courage to contact anyone about this. This struck me as odd, seeing as most people don't want the authorities or social services knocking at their door. Can I offer you some water? Coffee, maybe? That's what Valerie, Don's wife, asked me in a hushed voice. They both looked exhausted and unbathed, like they'd just been stranded on an island for weeks and were just rescued by me. They seemed indifferent to their surroundings, calm at the moment, but the tension was kinetic. No thank you. I passed up the offer. I wasn't comfortable accepting anything from the couple yet. Tell me, as we need to get started here, what are your children's names? How old are they? I already had this info, but I needed to survey how these two react to questioning. Valerie answered me. Well, Damien is 17. He dropped out of school last week, but he's not here today. And there's my little sweetheart, Kelsey. She's 11. She's with her grandmother for the weekend. It's Wednesday, ma'am. Oh, right. I'm sorry. She's with her auntie. I lose track, since they're never here anymore. She'd be home soon, though. Her husband stared at her intently, almost not staring at her at all, more like through her. I took note of all of this. I'm sorry, just remember you're being recorded for this interview. I apologize if I'm mistaken, but I have on file here that you have a 3rd child. They both stared coolly into my eyes. A chill ran up my spine, and my left leg went numb. This is a feeling I would get as a child if I ever made a joke that offended someone. Except now I'm 34, I suddenly felt out of place. Jessica, they both spoke unison. I relaxed slightly. Jessica, okay. Yes, I have that here. 7 years old, they nodded together, their faces twisted into an uncomfortable expression, both suddenly wringing their hands. Dan glanced over at the staircase to his left, I guess to silently signal as to Jessica's whereabouts. She's up there, Valerie told me, suddenly sobbing. A pang hit my heart like knuckles to a tether ball. I could feel my hemat iron swirling around my ribs. My stomach started to turn. Excellent. Can I meet her? I stiffly asked. Yes, but Valerie wiped her nose with a tissue and looked at the stairs. But you have to go get her. Another odd feeling. I was beginning to get suspicious, but I wasn't sure as to what I was getting suspicious of. These two seemed like a train wreck, and I'm certainly here to judge. Still, they didn't seem like bad people. They felt like victims to me. I decided to accept their request. Okay, where upstairs is she? In her room? I scratched at the back of my neck as I do when I'm not comfortable. Yeah, they both answered at the same time. Again, I stared at both of them for a bit before standing up and heading toward the stairs. Clang, my heart jumped as my foot slid something metal across the floor. I looked down to see an empty pet dish of some kind. Don't worry, sorry about that. Dan picked the dish up off the floor for me. That's our cat Evia's dish. I nodded, but didn't respond. I just climbed the stairs to the top floor. The creaks of the steps were eerie and loud as I made my way up to a dim, badly lit hallway. I couldn't quite collect any thoughts. There was something strange going on here, but I didn't know what. Why were they sending me up here to meet with their daughter? Why couldn't they retrieve her for me? Why did I accept their request? Upon checking out the long hallway, I noticed one door at the end. It was bedazzled with stickers and letters, appearing to be a very normal young girl's room. The letters let out Jessica's name, except the S next to the was missing. I also noticed there appeared to be no light coming from within the bedroom. I was taking mental notes of everything for my report. I opted for knocking on the door out of respect, but received no reply. After 3 or 4 tries, I decided to just open the door, as I figured they were wrong about which room she would be. And the door slowly creaked open. Under the grip of my left hand, my other hand clutched my clipboard, perhaps tighter than it should have. Just as I expected, the room was dark. Only a small amount of moonlight shined in from the cool autumn night. I found a switch on the wall to my right and clicked it on. Holy hell, my heart skipped a beat as what I saw in the center of the room was unexpected. A little girl with dark brown hair sat cross-legged on the bed, smiling at me. I didn't notice her before, with the lights off. I was startled, but I couldn't be stirred. I'm sorry, Jessica. I didn't think anyone was in here. Is all she said, still smiling at me. Hi, I'm here talking with your parents, and they told me you'd be up here. I just need to ask some questions. Is that okay, Jessica? Is this like a game? She asked. The smile never left her face. The problem is what seemed like a happy smile at first suddenly seemed a little off. I am not sure what the feeling was that I was getting, but I was starting to get unnerved again. Not exactly, but it will only take a moment. She just stared at me, her off-kilter smile never changing. I moved toward the dresser across from her bed and pulled out my pen. Jessica, how are you feeling today? Hungry? I blinked a couple times. Okay. Didn't you have dinner yet? It's pretty late right now. They had dinner, but I feed myself. I blinked at her again. They don't feed you. It's okay. I eat whenever I want. That smile on her face, it sent chills down my back, much cooler than the air outside. I cleared my throat a little. Do you like your parents? I asked. I used to. She dipped her head down a little bit, looking at me with her neck arched, still with the same grin on her face. Jessica, I need to get the full story here so I can make sure we find out what's going on. Okay, if you're honest, I can help you. Never budging her grin, Jessica nodded. Where are your brother and sister today? She didn't reply. I noticed the cat jump on the bed and lay by the post. It was staring at Jessica intently. Why, the kitty. Aw, do you like your cat? Jessica grinned wider now, and her eyes suddenly flashed with mischief. Then she titled her head to the side and spoke, but not in her own voice. This voice was deeper and gravelly. "I'm hungry." That's when she snatched the cat up from the bed and pulled its neck to her mouth. She crunched down, causing the poor thing to hiss and screech with agony. I gasped and fell back against the dresser. Jessica tilted her head back and gave the most maniacal laugh I've heard in my life. Blood was dripping from her teeth and lips. She took the cat in both hands now as blood splattered onto the bed. Then I heard a snapping sound, and it went silent. Jessica flopped down onto her stomach and continued to bite into the cat's fur and flesh. I could hear lips and teeth smacking and crunching. That's when I puked all over the floor. I think I may have puked 2 or 3 times before I lunged for the doorway, colliding with the opposite wall just outside. I stumbled and stopped my way back downstairs to where Dan and Valerie were sitting. They both just looked at me, obviously knowing I had just witnessed what they were acting so strange about. I looked at them both, not one of us saying a word for the longest time. Finally, as I began making my way to the door, Valerie spoke. "Wait," she exclaimed. I turned around, hand on the front door knob still, fear still present in my watery eyes. Valerie looked at me with the saddest eyes, gripping her husband's arm so tight, and said, "Aren't you going to help us?" Story 5, a child like no other. When I joined the case at 47 County Street, I didn't know what to expect. As a social worker, I see all kinds of screwed up things, from child abuse to children abusing their parents. Yet, when I got the reports from that household, I wasn't expecting much. The initial letters we received were from a neighbor describing loud noises, shouting in the late hours of the night, and a teenager storming off from the household on a bike last winter just after they heard what sounded like glass shattering from within the house. This had apparently been going on for a few years. Still, something about the way the cop came in on Tuesday, white as a sheet, asking about the case, probably should have at least so. You had set off some alarms. I was ignorant. There I stood, in the living room of the Bedford family home on County Street, beside myself as the story unfolded. Dan, the father of the 3 children, spoke. He first with tears in his eyes. "I'm so glad somebody called on us. My wife and I would have never had the courage to contact anyone about this." This struck me as odd, seeing as most people don't want the authorities or social services knocking at their door. "Can I offer you some water?" "Coffee, maybe." That's what Valerie, Don's wife, asked me in a hushed voice. They both looked exhausted and unbathed, like they'd just been stranded on an island for weeks and were just rescued by me. They seemed indifferent to their surroundings, calm at the moment, but the tension was kinetic. "No thank you." I passed up the offer. I wasn't comfortable accepting anything from the couple just yet. "Tell me, as we need to get started here, what are your children's names and how old are they?" I already had this info, but I needed to survey how these two reacted to questioning. Valerie answered me. "Well, Damien is 17. He dropped out of school last week, but he's not here today. And there's my little sweetheart, Kelsey. She's 11. She's with her grandmother for the weekend." "It's Wednesday, ma'am." "Oh, right. I'm sorry. She's with her aunt. I lose track, since they're never here anymore." she be home soon, though her husband stared at her intently, almost not staring at her at all. More like through her. I took note of all of this. Please note that you're being recorded for this interview. I apologize if I'm mistaken, but I says on file here that you have a third child. They both stared coolly into my eyes. A chill ran up my spine, and my left leg went numb. This is a feeling I would get as a child if I ever made a joke that offended someone, except not 34. I suddenly felt out of place. Jessica, T. A both spoke in unison. I relaxed slightly. Jessica, okay, yes, I have that here. 7 years old. They nodded together, their faces twisted into an uncomfortable expression, both suddenly wringing thigh. Our hands then glanced over at the staircase to his left. I gasped to silently signal as to Jessica's whereabouts. She's up there, Valerie told me, suddenly sobbing. A pang hit my heart like knuckles to a tetherball. I could feel my emotions swirling around my ribs. My stomach started to turn. Excellent. And I meet her? I asked stiffly. Yes, but Valerie wiped her nose with a tissue and looked at the stairs. But you have to go get her. Another odd feeling. I was beginning to get suspicious, but I wasn't sure just what I was getting suspicious of. These two seemed like a train wreck, and I was certainly one to judge still. They didn't seem like bad people. They felt like victims to me. I decided to accept their request. Okay. Where upstairs is she? In her room. I scratched at the back of my neck, as I do when I'm not comfortable. Yeah, they both answered at the same time again. I stared at both of them for a bit before standing up and heading toward the stairs. Clang, my heart jumped as my foot hit some metal across the floor. I looked down to see an empty pet dish of some kind. Don't worry, sorry about that. Dan picked the dish up off the floor for me. That's our cat. Evia's dish. I nodded, but didn't respond. I just climbed the stairs to the top floor. The creaks of the steps were eerie and loud as I made my way up to a dim, badly lit hallway. I couldn't quite collect my thoughts. There was something strange going on, but I didn't know what. Why were they sending me up to me? Tea with their daughter. Why couldn't they retrieve her for me? Why did I accept their request? Upon checking out the long hallway, I noticed one door at the end. It was bedazzled with stickers and letters, appearing to be a very normal young girl's room. The letters spelled out Jessica's name, except this next to the was missing. I also noticed there appeared to be no light coming from within the bedroom I was taking mental notes of. Everything from my report, I opted for knocking on the door out of respect, but received no reply. After 3 or 4 tries, I decided to just open it, figuring they were wrong about her whereabouts. The door slowly creaked open under the grip of my left hand. My other hand clutched my clipboard, perhaps tighter than it should have. Just as I expected, the room was dark. Only a small amount of moonlight shined in from the cool autumn night. I found a switch on the wall to my right and clicked it on. Holy hell, my heart skipped a beat as what I saw in the center of the room was unexpected. A little girl with dark brown hair sat cross-legged on the bed, smiling at me. I didn't notice her before. With the lights off, I was startled, but I couldn't be stirred. I'm sorry. Jessica, I didn't think anyone was in here. Hi, is all she said, still smiling at me. Hi, I'm here talking with your parents. and they told me you'd be up here. I just need to ask some questions. Is that okay, Jessica? Is this like a game?" She asked. The smile never left her face. The problem is, what seemed like a happy smile at first suddenly seemed a little off. I'm not sure what the feeling was that I was getting, but it definitely made me unnerved. Not exactly, but it will only take a moment. She just stared at me, her off-kilter smile never changing. I moved toward the dresser across from her bed and pulled out my pen. "Jessica, how are you feel? Ain't today hungry?" I blinked a couple times. "Hungry? Huh? Okay. Haven't you had dinner yet? It's pretty late right now." They had dinner, but I feed myself. I blinked at her again. "They don't feed you?" "It's okay. I eat whenever I want." That smile on her face, it sent chills down my back, much cooler than the air outside. I cleared my throat a little. "Do you like your parents?" I asked. "I used to." She dipped her head down a little bit, looking at me with her neck arched, still grinning as ever. "Jessica, I need to get the full story here so I can make we find out what's going on. Okay, if you're honest, I can help you." Still smiling away, she nodded. "Where are your brother and sister today?" She didn't reply. I noticed the cat jump on the bed and lay by the post. It was staring up at Jessica. "Oh, I see you have a little friend. Do you like your cat?" Jessica's grin grew wider and her eyes flashed with mischief. Then she tilted her head to the side and spoke, but not in her own voice. This voice was deeper and gravelly. "I'm hungry." That's when she snatched the cat up from the bed and pulled it as neck to her mouth. She crunched down, causing the poor thing to hiss and screech. With agony, I gasped and fell back against the dresser. Jessica tilted her head back and gave the most maniacal laugh I've heard in my life. Blood was dripping from her teeth and lips. She took the cat in both hands as blood splattered onto the bed. Then I heard a snapping sound, and the poor creature went silent. Jessica flopped down onto her stomach, continuing to bite into the cat's fur and flesh. I could hear her lips and teeth smacking and crunching. That's when I puked all over the goddamn floor. After spilling my guts, I lunged for the doorway, colliding with the opposite wall just outside. I stumbled and stomped my way back downstairs to where Dan and Valerie were sitting. They both just looked at me, obviously knowing I had just witnessed the reason for their strange behavior. I looked at them both, not one of us saying a word for the longest time. Finally, as I began making my way to the door, Valerie spoke. "Wait," she exclaimed. I turned around, my hand on the doorknob, fear still present in my watery eyes. Valerie looked at me with the saddest face, gripping her husband's arm so tight, and said, "Aren't you going to help?" U.S. Story 6, What Waits in the Woods. As a child, I was always fascinated with the woods, while the beautiful pines scattered the land, captivating me with their size and showing me a picture of strength and resilience. The dark brush intrigued me with the unknown happenings of its solemn, mysterious, and unrevealing insides. I had been intimidated all my life by those woods because of that brush, although until now my uneasiness had been unsubstantiated. I cannot seem to understand how I had known that there was actually something to be afraid of in those dark woods, but something inside of me had been warning me all my life of the monster that I had been afraid If only I had listened to that feeling, I might be able to sleep soundly at night. My name is Shane Walker, and I live in a rural town in southeast Texas called Jonesville. I can see that some people could have trouble with that fact because of stereotypes assuming that people from Texas are uneducated and that there are no woods in Texas. But I beg to differ. Southeast Texas is home to a place known as the Big Thicket, which is a coniferous forest, incredibly humid and hot in the summer, while damp and frigid in the winter. The brush is so thick in this area that moving through it is difficult without a machete, as I digress. I grew up in a modern family of 5, including myself, my dad, my mom, and 2 sisters. My parents were always very protective of my siblings and I, as both insisted the world's changed since when I was little. You can't wander around anymore without us worrying about you getting snatched up by somebody. So I was only allowed to go to friends' houses whose parents my family trusted. I spent my school days in the town's elementary school with a small class even for our quaint town of 12 kids. So my friends' circle was fairly limited. And even when I graduated to junior high and into a bigger school, my circle did not expand due to awkwardness and shyness. Through junior high, I was only able to keep one close friend who I hung out with every weekend possible. This friend, named Devin Daniels, lived in a small house with his grandma, a house surrounded by woods that captivated me every time I came over. One day in the 8th grade, after growing bored with playing Black Ops, I finally gave in to the natural, childlike temptation to explore those woods. So Devin and I planned our expeditions to clear out parts of the woods, just to build a clubhouse in which we would have a wide variety of adventures. We started off with a single machete and a rake, which to most people in our area was not seen as a problem, as they believed 12 and 13-year-olds could handle themselves with machetes to a certain extent, and I began hacking away at the brush as I was a bigger and therefore stronger boy, and and used the rake to start raking away the debris I was making. This kept us busy for a couple days as I formed a boundary by hacking a circle clear around a large oak. After forming the boundary, we contemplated our endeavor. Looking at our hard work, we decided that enough had been done to form a clubhouse for the brush surrounding the round clearing we had made form something similar to walls for us, and the shade of the oak provided cover from the unmerciful sun. But if only we had built walls and a roof to protect us from the outside world, that fateful account with that predator would not have occurred. It was in those woods that my friend and I spent many nights after we had cleared out our section. I always felt that we should have had more protection. So every time we went to spend the night outside, I insisted we pitch a tent. My friend obliged every time, and we always brought out his old blue tent that was found in his closet, and in this tent we unknowingly met with the creature that would soon come to haunt my nightmares. One night, Devin and I were lying in the tent texting people, exchanging ghost stories, talking about things that had happened in our lives recently, and eating Cheeto Puffs, when I heard an unusual rustling outside. "Dude, you hear that?" I asked my friend. "No, what are you talking about?" Devin replied, "I just heard something in the woods. It sounded kinda big." I stated, "Oh, no, maybe it's the killer coyote." Or the hash-slinging slasher dude we're gonna die, he sarcastically retorted, mocking me for my fear of the woods and the dark. Shut up, Dev. I'm serious. I heard something running around out there, and I'm getting pretty freaked out. Don't worry, Shaw. Annie, you're just overreacting. It's probably just the wind, or maybe it's that stupid coon that keeps scattering our trash around up at the house. Okay, but it sounded big. Just be a little quieter so we don't attract it, just in case it is something. All right, was Devon said, ending the conversation, as I had no appropriate response to his insult other than rolling my eyes. The night continued unlike all other nights, with us conversing and jokingly insulting each other occasionally, when suddenly I heard another unusual rustling in the woods, this time more distinguished, and by the look of terror on Devon's face, I inferred that he had heard the noise as well. See what I mean now? I whispered to the frightened preteen. Be quiet, it might hear us, he replied. In a squeaky, frightened whisper. The two of us sat, scared and listening intently as the wind blew through the pines surrounding us. As minutes passed, I heard slight rustlings in the bushes, and it sounded like whatever was out there was coming closer to us. My feeling of slight discomfort burst into agonizing terror as I suddenly realized the only thing standing between me and whatever was out there was a thin blue piece of fabric. My breaths grew more frantic and exaggerated as I sat in the tent with absolute dread growing in the pit of my stomach. But soon the sounds ceased, and as they did, my panic started to cease as well. After about half an hour of quiet, I let out a large breath of air and smirked at my friend. You were so freaked, man. Maybe it was the slinging slasher, I mocked, making my voice slightly higher to match his whenever I let out the words slinging slasher. Shut up, you were scared too, he grumpily retorted. Yeah, but not as scared as. Do you think it was somebody playing a prank? I sure hope. Devon started to say, interrupted, as if on cue, by a loud scraping noise that seemed to come from the oak tree directly beside the tent. I looked directly at my friend and saw his face grow pale with the expression of terror I had previously seen only minutes before. The feeling in my stomach came back to me all at once, a feeling I can only describe as agony, as the volume of the noise increased. That horrible feeling of absolute terror grew as well, and as my anguish became more powerful, a short, loud shriek managed to escape my lips, and, to my alarm and confusion, the scraping noise suddenly ceased. As I sat against the blue canvas of the tent, I intently listened for any more disturbances. The woods were quiet once again, except for the sound of the brush and trees flowing with the wind and a faint, recognizable sound that I could not quite place. It sounded near, but in a sense far away. Everything else in the world vanished as I focused on that sound, the steady, rhythmic sound, so familiar, yet I could not quite place it. I pondered what the sound was, and how I could not seem to realize what it was, no matter how hard I tried. Soon the sound went away, and all was quiet. The rest of the night was relatively calm. The wind flowed through the trees the rest of the night, and there were no further disturbances. Terrified, my friend and I laid down for the rest of the night, unable to sleep and too scared to run back to the house the morning eventual. Why came after what seemed like an eternity, and Devon and I realized that we had made it through that terrible night alive. After grabbing our essential items, clothes, blankets, etc., we looked back at our broken clubhouse one last time and noticed two distinct things: claw and chew marks going into the large oak that was meant to have provided sanctuary for us, and footprints of whatever that beast was. As I took a closer look at the footprints, I noticed where the creature had gone during that traumatizing experience for Devon and I. The bushes facing our north side, which led to the oak. After departing from the oak, the large canine-like prints led to the south side of the tent, right by where I had been laying, and slowly I began to notice something. The familiar noise I had heard the previous night was the slow and rhythmic sound of a large beast breathing. The creature had been inches from my face. Story 7, Mirror Avenue. I live in a pretty small, relatively unknown town. This is the internet, so I won't divulge too much information, but I will tell you it's in southern Wisconsin. I live on the corner of Lawn and Elm Street, and pretty near to my house is a stretch of road that most people call Mirror Avenue. Of course, it's not really technically an avenue, just an extension of Lawn Street. And it's not the whole road, just a short stretch within the block adjacent to the one my house is on. I've lived here my whole life, and everyone I know has referred to it as Mirror Avenue at some point, but many of them couldn't give me an explanation as to why it was called that. The stories I got were mostly always different, usually something about a mirror maker, or whatever you call people who made mirrors back when the town was founded, who got caught up in some kind of cult, and the street being cursed. Of course, the exact accounts varied. One told to me by a friend in middle school included the street being lit down the middle by a very long, man-sized mirror. People would look into this mirror, and the reflection would be doing something different, usually mischievous, and if there was more than one person in the mirror at a time, the reflections would try to hurt each other, and it was said that the people could feel pain inflicted by the reflections. This was just the ramblings of a middle schooler, and tonight on my way home I found out exactly why they call it Mirror Avenue. I worked relatively late today, until 8 o'clock, and this being December, it got dark pretty early. I got off at 8 and decided to walk home instead of calling one of my parents. Despite being 18, I never learned to drive for financial reasons, and the fact that I lived in a town small enough that there was very little that wasn't in walking distance. I walked to and from work all the time, but I usually take Elm Street instead of Lawn. It's faster, but tonight I thought since I didn't really have to be home at any specific time, I would take the longer way. This route would take me right down Lawn Street to Mirror Avenue, where I had the single most terrifying experience of my life. The walk home was pretty normal until I reached the point by the park where I would have normally diverged onto Elm Street. I turned onto Lawn Street without even thinking about the whole mirror thing. And white time I had ever walked this way before was in the daytime, so I was never really afraid, and therefore it wasn't anywhere near the front of my mind. I was only walking for about a minute before I noticed, but there was someone walking on the other side of the street. I looked over as soon as I noticed, and they did the same. I couldn't tell for sure, but they were wearing the same coat that I had on, only I couldn't see a face because they had their hood up. I walked for a few more seconds and almost tripped on the edge of an uneven piece of sidewalk. It was then that I noticed something. And gee, strange. I guess had I thought more about the mirror thing before, I would have expected it. But the guy on the other side of the street stumbled at the same time. I stood there for a second and then started to walk again, thinking maybe it was a fluke. But to test it, I stopped abruptly and watched to see what he did. Of course he stopped, watching me the whole time I was watching him. Now, I was certain something was off. I yelled across the street at the guy, but I didn't hear anything from him, even though he seemed to be making the same motion I was as if he was yelling too. I stood there for about 5 minutes, waving my arms around and things like that, watching the man on the other side of the street as he mimicked me perfectly. Eventually, I decided to see what happened if I got closer, and so I stepped out onto the street, and he did the same. I stopped, scared for a moment. I couldn't tell who it was because of the hood, and I wasn't sure what would happen if I got any closer. And the whole time he was silently copying me. Every aspect of my movement sensed perfectly, as if he was my reflection. Now I was thinking about the mirror thing, and based on the stories I had heard growing up, I expected that nothing good could come of this. My curiosity got the better of me, though, and I got closer until I was just about in the very center of the road, with my reflection just on the other side of the lane divider. I almost reached out and tried to touch it, but I was too afraid, and at the last minute pulled my hand back. It was then that I heard a sort of growling from the reflection. Apparently it had wanted me to touch it, as it made this clear by the mumbling from underneath its hood. I thought for a moment, and I wanted to see if this was some sort of reflection, so I figured maybe if I put my hood up, he would end up putting his down, and so I stepped back to the sidewalk because I was uncertain as to what would happen next, and I prepared myself. I was shaking, partially in anticipation and partially because I was terrified of what might happen to me. I was obviously in some deep shit here, as I knew now that this had to have something to do with the old legends. I stood there, my hands just above my shoulders, ready to put my hood up, with my reflection doing the same. I counted down from 10, whispering NG to myself, and praying that this was just some kid messing with me, or that it was all somehow in my head. As I got closer to one, I shook more violently, so much so that it had become apparent that my reflection was also shaking. As I finally hit one and put my hood up, my suspicions were confirmed as I saw the guy on the other side put his hood down. I have no way to accurately describe what I saw. The only thing I can say is that it had my same basic features, but they were contorted and twisted in a hideous and disgusting way that left me staring at it in a horrified daze. It was smiling at me, and that's when I realized that it was no longer doing exactly as I was. I stood there on the sidewalk in shock as it stepped off the curb and began walking towards me. I panicked and ran down the street, and my reflection followed, only now it was staring at me the whole time, not just when I was looking at it. It was faster than me, and the closer I got to the edge of the block, the closer it got to me. I was certain for a moment that I could hear it saying something, but I couldn't tell what it was. Just as I was about to reach the corner, it reached out and grabbed my hood, tearing it off as I forced myself forward. I thought it had me. I thought I was dead, another victim of Mirror Avenue. But when I heard that coat rip, it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard, and I ran like hell until I got right in front of my house. And it was only then that I realized that it was no longer chasing me. I assume it must have stopped when I got past the edge of the block, when I exited the stretch of lawn street that was Mirror Avenue. I looked back at Mirror Avenue, expecting to see it standing there on the corner or something, but I couldn't see my reflection anywhere. This worried me, and I got inside as quickly as I could. My family wasn't home. They left a note saying that they had gone Christmas shopping and to call. When I got home, the first thing I did was lock all the doors and windows and close the curtains. And then I fetched my brother's old sword that he had bought at Renaissance Fair, just in case I call Ed, and didn't mention anything about what had happened. Later, when they finally got home, I told them that I had run into a dog, and that's why my coat was ripped. I wasn't sure if I should say anything to anyone about what really happened or not. I was afraid that they might think I was crazy or on drugs or something. I might tell some friends at school, and there's anyone who reads this, but one thing is for certain, I'm never taking the long way home again.